Okay, I think for the sake of time, we'll get going. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Welcome to the Ocean Quieting Workshop Series hosted by the Global Alliance for Managing Ocean Noise. The Global Alliance for Managing Ocean Noise, Game On, is an international partnership of proactive and action-minded scientists, managers, policymakers, and industry representatives, fostering inclusive dialogues to fuel creative, workable solutions that will transform ocean noise management. Game On is developing responsible, modern, integrated, and informed solutions for managing anthropogenic ocean noise with three key actionable goals. One is to scan horizons to proactively identify emerging concerns and solutions. Next, to map existing and emerging knowledge on ocean noise, technology, and policy. And finally, to create inclusive dialogues and networks to collaboratively solve ocean noise issues globally. We thank you for joining us for Workshop 1, Practical Approaches for Reducing Ocean Noise Associated with Offshore Renewable Energy Development, where we hope to foster a productive setting for stakeholders from multiple sectors to debate, break down barriers, and ultimately develop data-informed and technologically advanced solutions to the challenge of ocean noise. The focal topics of this workshop will include lessons learned from different projects and experiences and pairing monitoring and mitigation requirements for ongoing developments in science and research. This workshop will culminate by identifying and proposing opportunities for actionable next steps. I will now hand it off to Jill Lewandowski, a member of the Game On Steering Committee and Division Chief of the Environmental Assessment within the Office of Environmental Programs at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in the US, to tell you a bit more about the structure of today's workshop. Jill.
Great. Thanks, Doug. So today our session will be about 2 hours, and that includes our speaker's presentation in the first hour and then a panel discussion in the second hour. As attendees, your cameras and microphones are not functional for the session, but we really do encourage you to share your questions and comments in the Q&A, which is monitored by our team. We also encourage you to go to the Game On website linked to your registration to see additional projects related to our topics, details on who is involved, and descriptions of future workshop sessions. Today's sessions will also be recorded and posted in the website later this week. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First up is Howard Rosenbaum. Howard is the Senior Conservation Scientist and Director of Wildlife Conservation Society's Ocean Giants program, which aims to secure the future of whales, dolphins, and other marine species. He is a senior scientist at the American Museum of Natural History, core faculty member at Columbia University's E3B department, a member of the IUCN Cetacean Specialist Group, an important marine mammal areas task force, and the International Whaling Commission's scientific committee. Howard has led many marine mammal conservation projects around the world, including the Indian Pacific and Atlantic Oceans and the Arctic. In the New York Bight, Howard leads WCS's efforts for research and conservation of marine mammals, which includes a collaborative effort to use state-of-the-art near real-time acoustic monitoring and other technologies to study whales and ocean noise. Howard earned his PhD from Yale University. We also have Michael Bellman joining us. Michael is the Chief Executive Officer of ITAP GmbH, Institute of Technical and Applied Physics. He is a principal senior consultant specialized in underwater acoustics, underwater noise modeling, and noise abatement services with the Institute for Technical and Applied Physics. He has more than 20 years of experience in measuring both airborne and underwater noise. In the underwater realm, he is an experienced practitioner of impact assessment regarding pile drive noise prediction and noise abatement during harbor construction and offshore wind farm construction. Michael has also worked with continuous noise like operational noise or background noise. Since 2013, he has been involved in the implementation of a noise monitoring concept in accordance with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in Germany, and is currently an external expert for underwater noise of the German National Committee Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Then we'll have Doug rejoining us. Doug is a professor of conservation technology and environment and engineering at Duke University. His activities represent a mixture of research tool development coupled closely with the science driving the need for these tools and the dissemination of resulting research to students at all levels as well as the broader society. Since starting graduate school and continuing to the present, Doug has pioneered several marine research tools and methods that seek to create knowledge as well as integrate and transfer it. He has worked to apply the tools and teachings of basic science to conservation-driven research, including teaching innovative and experiential courses such as the history and future of ocean energy and ocean engineering. And last but certainly not least is Brandon Southall. Brandon is the president and senior associate at Southall Environmental Associates Incorporated and a research associate with the University of California, Santa Cruz, and an adjunct assistant professor at Duke University. Brandon obtained his master's and PhD degrees from University of California, Santa Cruz, studying communication, hearing, and the effects of noise on seals and sea lions. He directed the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, Ocean Acoustics Program, and has been centrally involved in developing systematic noise exposure criteria for marine mammals and the first ever acoustic guidelines for the agency. Brandon founded and runs SEA Incorporated, a research and consulting small business conducting and applying science to support environmental management assessments and environmentally responsible development. He is the former director of NOAA's Ocean Acoustics Program, where he helped develop acoustic exposure guidelines for marine mammals. So I think that's in there twice for added emphasis. Brandon continues to study the behavioral responses of marine mammals to human-produced sounds. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Howard to kick off our conversation.
Thank you, Jill and Brandon, Doug, and Juliet. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Where did my, hang on one second. Of course, the presentation has now, it's been fine the whole time, and then it's gone away. Hang on one second, folks. Let me just hit it again. Well, this is interesting. I'm just going to quit for 1 second PowerPoint and then restart it. Apologies. We went through this and it was fine. Gotta love when this happens. Here's another way to do it. See if we can do it this way. Okay. Can you see my screen, everybody? Or can someone just nod and tell me they can see it?
We see it fine, Howard.
Okay. That was a little alarming, but okay, here we go.
We can't see your presentation, Howard. We can just see your folder with the presentation in it.
Can you see it now?
No.
You maybe highlighted the wrong window, Howard.
No, it's not even, the presentation is not even coming up under share screen. Oh, there it is. Okay. It disappeared, Doug. Now let's try it. Can you see it now?
There you go.
Here we are.
Hey, okay, there you go. I only had to quit it 3 times to get it back. I'm sorry for that. Okay, here we go. We'll go even faster now. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about the relevance of establishing baselines for marine mammals in the context of offshore wind development. And I'm going to be giving you an example from the New York Bight. So I don't think I need to go into extreme background about the concerns and relevance for ocean noise, other than within the last 5 or 6 years, this has been more widely adopted both in the international level and national levels of many countries in terms of concerns, in terms of policies, recommendations, mitigation actions, and efforts related to anthropogenic oceanborne noise. Here's a paper that we published last year. And again, when we think about it in the US context here, and we talk about offshore wind development, now we have additional agencies involved, federal agencies, state agencies, offshore wind developers, academia, and NGOs. And that's what brings us together here today as part of the Game On effort. So setting the stage for offshore wind development in the Atlantic, I think folks are familiar with some of the maps that have been produced up and down the East Coast that are evolving and changing, and what we know for the Northeast. And of course, now what happened last week in the New York Bight with the record-breaking lease sale that topped $4.37 billion. It's expansive, it's up and down the East Coast. And how it overlaps with marine mammals and baleen whales more widely is of particular interest. In particular, when we hone in on the New York Bight as one example, and we can think about this for other areas of the eastern seaboard, we have a critically endangered species, the North Atlantic right whale, that has typically folks think of as on a regimented schedule in terms of its migration, but more recently it's been occurring outside of expected periods. These animals number less than, alarming levels, less than 350 individuals on this planet. We have humpback and fin whales here in the New York Bight that are occurring for extended periods of time, especially during periods of time when people aren't expecting them, including supplemental and significant foraging activities, essential life functions. We have both sightings and detections of other large whales, such as blue, sei, and minke whales. And then we have large concentrations of other types of cetaceans, acoustically sensitive species, beaked whales, harbor porpoise, again, known more, the harbor porpoise, the latter known more from the European context, both in and around offshore wind development areas, but also in and around cable landing sites and cable corridors where the energy will be cabled to shore. As we think about the impacts from ocean noise on these marine mammals, we have to think about it at the individual, the population, and the habitat levels. And I know Brandon and Doug are going to dive into that a bit more. And Brandon and I presented on this back at the State of the Science Cumulative Impacts Workshop, sponsored by NYSERDA, where we have to think about this, about what actually is happening with all of these populations. There are ongoing unusual mortality events along the Atlantic coast for humpbacks, minkies, and North Atlantic right whales. And as an example, for humpbacks, 50% of these mortalities along the East Coast show signs of human interaction, ship strikes, and entanglements. So I can point you to that report as well. So as we think about all the effort and what's happened actually over the last 5 years in the New York Bight, it's pretty remarkable. And we're in a position of playing catch up. And some areas along the eastern seaboard are further ahead. Some are a little bit far behind, and others are on par with what I'm about to present. But I'm not going to do any of these justice in this brief overview, but it starts with generating these various types of baselines in terms of wide-scale distribution for some of these baleen whales. This was an effort sponsored by New York State DEC. And these are broad brushstroke monthly aerial surveys for baleen whales that was recently published over a 3-year period. You can drill down with some of our own work, boat-based work, where we look at sightings. And again, these are overlapping in time scale, sort of 2017 to 2019, 2020, detections and sightings, visual sightings of animals. Again, here's a humpback whale example where we have sightings of animals, particularly humpback whales, shown per sighting per unit effort with in a particular gridded area. And then we overlay that with various anthropogenic activities, wind energy areas, traffic separation scheme, the traffic lanes, and recreational boating. And you can begin to see the overlap of these, and then the combination of those factors. You can see the overlap of the distribution of these animals with these various activities. And this is ongoing efforts, again, getting into more finer scale work that then is being now these types of syntheses and model-based approach. All these visual sightings will go into that. Something that's actually also getting very interesting, and I put this slide in here, is how do we factor in new technologies? The use of environmental DNA or eDNA to detect both species and their prey. There's a paper we published 2 weeks ago. Not only do we have the sightings of these animals, but we can also begin to look at the prey species and other fish species and other wider marine biodiversity in the water column that is there. And again, how do we factor those in for drivers of where animals are and where they're moving? So again, this has great interest and relevance, I know, to offshore wind development. So I put this slide in. In terms of building these baselines, there's been quite a bit of effort in the New York Bight by a number of folks that are part of the panel, by our colleagues at Cornell University, University of Rhode Island, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Orsted, Equinor, and again, start to look at these syntheses. And you can see this was a workshop that we organized, was supported by NYSERDA. The report is available, so it just shows the extent and how we begin to think about how all of our monitoring and generating information, both on the animal presence and the levels of noise, can begin to take shape, and what we can do with those types of data to build these better baselines and some ways forward. So I'll point you to that workshop report. And again, as we start to understand the soundscape, the levels of noise, some really nice work by Aaron Rice and colleagues that set the stage for the East Coast that he published quite some time ago, and is probably in the process of updating, that we're also beginning to look at here in areas closer to the New York Harbor, where there'll be additional vessel transits and cable landings potentially, and showing that those levels of noise are only higher at this point. And so again, this work is both being updated on various fronts, but again, it starts to establish what we know about the soundscape before any wide-scale construction activities occur in the New York Bight. And I think as we think about new technology and the use of existing technologies, the work that we are doing in partnership with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and supported by Equinor, again, offers us opportunities to think about how we use these technologies. The near real-time passive acoustic monitoring to trigger NOAA slowdowns, and how that can also be used, to think about early warnings for vessel transits, pile driving, noise exposures as we analyze those data. So again, thinking about that in these types of frameworks relevant to Game On as well, in addition to the vessel strike reduction risk. And I think we have an opportunity here through Game On, as both Doug and Jill said in their opening remarks, to widen the tent here and to bring more people in, to raise these issues that I started in terms of even wider audience, to get folks engaged about these ocean noise issues. And we do that both through our website and our driving traffic here, and also with the Game On website, with a kiosk at the New York Aquarium. Here you see former Mayor Bill de Blasio learning about whales right off of the harbor in New York. And so we have an opportunity to bring these issues more front and center. So finally, last few slides, just to take it into the context for our discussions and deliberations as part of the workshop. We, at the global level, just prior to the start of the pandemic, we convened at the IUCN headquarters in Glan, Switzerland, in an effort to think about how we offer best practice and better guidance around the world for renewable energy development. There were a number of developers involved, as well as NGOs, and this workshop report was produced, all part of and all set in the context of the mitigation hierarchy, as you see in the table to the right of the slide here. And as we think about the points for our discussion, we now have an opportunity, before us. We have the opportunities to think about and all of the efforts that are considering noise impacts at various stages of offshore wind development. There are lots of entities involved here, from state and federal agencies to civil society to academia to the offshore wind developers themselves and everything that's doing. And there's a range of possibilities that we can consider to minimize and mitigate impacts. And what I try to do with this New York Bight example is just give you a taste of what it's like to kind of set these baselines on the animals and the habitats and what all the context is. And I think Doug and Brandon and Michael are going to take it into more of some of the things that we can do in terms of quieting technologies and risk assessment. The last few thoughts that I'd like to just leave you with are to think about this as we frame things in the context of the mitigation hierarchy. And there'll be lots of discussion, but also to begin to think about other types of programs, incentive-based programs that exist for some of the ports and some of the sanctuaries. And are there ways that we can incentivize, quieting in some of these habitats? And I really look forward to our efforts as part of Game On, as part of the steering committee and the sounding board to establish how we can augment and enhance these efforts together. Thank you.
So I think now it's up to me to present. So I want to give a presentation about the noise abatement systems for impact pile driving and technical options to comply with noise limits or noise mitigation values. My name is Michael Bellman. So After the incident in Fukushima in 2011, the German government decided to turn off any nuclear power source by 2022. Means end of this year, we will turn off all nuclear power in Germany. To guarantee sufficient electrical power, renewable energy has grown significantly over the last 10 years. However, the demand of renewable energies must go along with an awareness of sustainability aspects, especially for the protection of marine ecosystem. Among other ecological issues, the underwater noise emissions have moved into focus since most offshore foundations are anchored in the seabed with the impact pile driving procedure. This noise-intensive installation methods leads to impulsive noise emissions, which could harm the marine life. For the environmentally sustainable use of renewable energy sources at sea, it is therefore necessary to reduce the source input into the water. That's the reason the German government decided in 2011 as first nation worldwide a so-called noise mitigation value of a broadband 160 dB SEL value in 750 meter to protect the protected species, which are in Germany only the Hammer porpoise and some seals and pinnipeds. So they could flee away and they could scare away by underwater noise. And it's very simple. So you just have to put a hydrophone in 750 meter distance, and you could easily see after each single strike if you comply with 160 or if not. And during the first installation up till now, each single strike must be measured and must be reported to the BSH. Sorry. So the challenging issue was it was measured several million single strikes, but everything was, let me say, captured by NDAs. So a lot of persons know what happened, but nobody could publish anything. That's the reason a research and development project was set on behalf of the BSH over the last years to give a lessons learned report regarding the data noise, underwater noise database marine ears. And you could download this report from our website. And the aim of this was to put all 21 offshore wind farms which are installed in the German Main, as well as 28 single installation projects like prototype installations, converter platforms, and so on. So this huge database include more than 2,400 pilot installations, and diameter range between 1.8 to 8.1 meter in diameter, and all noise mitigation systems which are available on the planet, as well as noise abatement system, were tested in German waters. So the aim of this lessons learned report or research and development project was to investigate what are the site-specific and project-specific influencing factors on unmitigated pile driving noise, and what is the lessons learned regarding noise mitigation concept. The output is that we have a legal, the legal requirements are summarized in this report. We have identified significant or most relevant site-specific and project-specific influencing factors on pile driving noise, and we have now a definition for German waters. What is the state of the art regarding noise mitigation concept? Here, just to have a look and to highlight this, at this webpage, you could see a look on the Marine Ears database, which is public available. It's the biggest underwater noise database worldwide regarding impact pile driving, with more than 2,500 piles. And we are currently building up this Marine Ears database for continuous noise as well as UXU clearance data, which is soonest available. And there is a public tool so that you could have a look what happened over the last years, what is ongoing at the moment in German waters. Just to highlight one of the most influencing factors on impact pile driving noise, you could see here on the left screen the sound pressure level measured in 750 meter. You see on the X scale the diameter of the foundation, and what you could clearly see each cross or triangle is the SEL or the L peak measured in 750 meter. We are just putting unmitigated pile driving events in this picture, and each cross is representing one offshore wind farm we measured or one single installation. And what you could clearly see is that there is a good correlation between the noise you could measure in 750 meter and the pile diameter. The bigger the pile, the louder it is. But you could also see on the gray shaded lines that there are other main influencing factors. Otherwise, we have a better correlation between these two sides or metrics. What does it now mean regarding noise mitigation and requirements for noise mitigation? So in Germany, we have the limiting values of 160 and 190 dBl peak and SEL. So that means we need 20 dB of noise reduction if we want to install 8-meter monopiles. Just to be aware, the next generation of monopiles will be more than 10 meters in Germany, and I expect the same holds for US as well. So what does 20 dB means? If we just have to highlight the sound pressure level, so the physical metrics on the wide scale, and on the X scale, the sound pressure level, and we are starting with 180 dB in 750 meter, then you have to reduce by a factor of 10 the noise to comply with 160. So that means 20 dB of noise reduction correlates to a reduction of the physical metric sound pressure by 90 dB. And if we talk about energy or intensity, we have to reduce it by 99%. So this is a nightmare for all acousticians. However, now we are looking for noise mitigation measures. And if we want to talk about this, we have to have a look. Do we want to avoid underwater noise? Then we are talking about noise mitigation systems, or do we reduce existing underwater noise in the water? So we have to talk about noise abatement system. For noise mitigation systems, we do not know a lot, but what we know exactly is if you reduce the impact pile driving energy, so high-low means high blow rate and low blow energy, including soft start, including a soft ramp-up procedure, then you could reduce the noise entry in the water significantly. The same holds if we talk about vibropiling, but then we are not talking about impact pile driving. We are talking about continuous noise. We will start the installation of the offshore wind farm Kaskasi 2 within the next upcoming days or hours, and this wind farm will be installed in vibropiling. So we could talk a little bit more about this within the next upcoming weeks and months. For sure, you could also use suction buckets or gravity foundations, but they are not all viable for all projects depending on the site and project-specific conditions. Blue piling hammer was tested once, but this prototype is currently not available. And new hammer techniques will come on the market, which are called Pulse and MNAU. And we have now the pleasure to make the first offshore research and development project with the Pulse hammer in May this year. So that means within 2022, we could talk about if we have a new noise mitigation measure in this game. If we are looking to noise abatement system, I try to wrap up this into 3 groups. The first is just put air in the water, so means we are talking about bubble curtain system. The next is a shell and shell systems, so for instance, a noise mitigation screen from EHC. And then we have the other group, so I couldn't say what these are. Most of them are resonator systems. But if you have a look, what of these systems survive or were tested offshore and are offshore reliable, then we just have 3 offshore abatement systems in place. It's a big bubble curtain system, it's the EHC noise mitigation screen, it's the hydrosound damper, and I expect that the ADMM system from US will also come into this game. So I will give a short introduction of these 3 methods of 4 abatement system. The first is a noise mitigation screen from EHC. It's a shell and shell system. It's a close to pile noise mitigation system. It was used until water depths of 40 meters, and the maximum pile diameter was 8 meters. The living weight of this system is 800 to 1,000 ton. The advantage is it's also a pile guiding system integrated, and you could also make inclination measurements with this tool. The disadvantage is the dimension and the weight and the impact on the installation process itself, ground coupling effects, and what happened if you have not a flat bathymetry. So I'm talking about varied water depth. It's not possible to use this any longer. And for sure, we have an increased safety risk during the deployment. However, what we found out that this noise abatement system is independent of water depths and current in direction. It was used more than 450 times. We do not see any malfunctions, and we see that the noise, measured noise reduction ranged between 13 to 17 dB. In the latest generation, we see something between 15 to 17 dB, even if we have water depths up to 40 meters. So that means this is a robust and ready for offshore noise mitigation system or noise abatement system. If we talk about the hydrosound damper, it's a resonator system. It's also close to pile. It consists of a fisher net, HSD elements or balloons, and a ballast box. And you could see it here, how it works. It looks very similar, but these are balloons and not steel. And it was used up to 45 meter water depths. The advantage is we are not talking about 1,000 tons of steel. We are talking about 45 to 50, 55 tons of steel and formed plastic. And you could also tune these HST elements. So this is a resonator system. So you could tune it. The disadvantage is that you also could not avoid any ground coupling effects. Means the energy which is going into the seabed will be radiated in the water as well. The next step is the ballast box, including the lifting tool. So you have to design this carefully for each single installation vessel. And for sure, it's the lifetime of these HSD elements. So you just use it by something like 25 to 30 times, and then you have to exchange the fisher net. However, the noise reduction, what we saw are independent of water depth and current. We see that we have successful applications several hundred times. And what we see is, yes, we could save something like 10 decibels, even if we are at 40 meter water depth. So everything is fine, but it requires a project-specific design. And I think it's ready for offshore application. So it's a very robust system. A new player is coming on the game. It's the ADBM system. It's also a resonator system. It's also close to pile. It consists of vertical block shapes or shape blocks. It was used up to 30 meters with pile diameters of 8 meters. It is also very lightweighted. It's also tunable, so it's very comparable to the HST system. It has the same disadvantage as an HST system. We have successfully applications several times in some research and development projects, but the first application showed that we need a little bit more enhancement on that. You are currently saving a little bit less than 10 decibels with application of this new noise abatement system. Now we are coming to the bubble curtain, the big bubble curtain. So it's the only independent system which is far away from the pile. It consists of compressed air nozzle hose on the seabed, and it was used up to 45 meters for impact pile driving and for UXO clearance up to 70 meters. And it's tunable. Currently, it was used for monopile installation of more than 8 meters. So, and you could see how it looks like if you have a good application and a double application and a single application. The advantage is it's completely independent of the foundation. It's completely independent of the installation process itself. It could be pre-laid and it could operate whenever you need. The disadvantage, you need a separate vessel. You need a lot of compressors and you have to coordinate between these vessels that everything is working smoothly. However, the noise reduction depends on a lot of things like water depth, current, and so on and so on. But if you make it very good, as you see it here in these pictures, you could save something like 15 to 16 decibels, even if you are at 40 meter water depths. If you go to higher water depths, it will be a little bit more challenging and the overall noise reduction reduced or decreased slightly. However, the lessons learned report from BSH showed that we have the diameter on the X scale and the year when it was installed. So you could see in this graph on the right hand, you see this is the SEL in 750 meter, and here are the years. So you see we do not have any compliance with the regulations within the first 3 or 4 years. But then you see with increasing diameter, we have a constant SEL and we have a compliance situation in Germany. So this is due to the fact that the government spent a lot of money, like 27 billion euros in 14 different research and development projects, and developer as well as the regulator give a lot of give it place to the industry to test new noise abatement system and noise mitigation measures. So from 2015 onwards, it is state of the art to use in Germany 2 different noise abatement systems simultaneously, and then you could fulfill this. If we now talk about the regulations in UK or US, it's a little bit more challenging. You plan to build an offshore wind farm, you have to make a noise risk assessment and you come to a mitigation plan. Then you go offshore and you have to make impact pile driving, make recordings, and you have also an impact range. And then you have to compare what happened if the predicted impact radius is smaller, is higher than the real world impact radius, everything is fine. But what happened if the impact radius, what is, let me say, predicted in advance, is smaller than the real world, then it might happen that you are in very big trouble. So the underwater noise regulation in US and UK is much more complex due to the fact that you are not only focusing on pinnipedes and harbor porpoise, but also at low frequency and mid frequency whales. So you have to take into account the behavioral aspects as well as the injury aspects for different species. You have also site-specific transmission loss to take into account. You have to calculate the impact radius depending on frequency weightings, like for instance, NIMS and Southall et al. And you also have to take into account a pile driving sequence, including soft start and blow rate. So that means you have to know a lot of things in advance to calculate this impact radius and then to compare this with real world data. Furthermore, you also have to comply with stationary and moving species. So that means we have to have a look what is not the overall insertion loss of the noise abatement system, but also have a look on the frequency dependent insertion loss. And you could see here the frequency or the insertion loss on the Y scale. On the X scale, you see the center frequency. And what you could see is that all noise abatement systems are not very good at very low frequency, which is not surprising from physical aspects. But you could see that we could save up to 40 decibels in the frequency range around 1 kilohertz. So this is not a problem. And you could also see if we put not only one noise abatement system in place, but a combination of both, the increases are not very significant in lower frequency parts. This comes to the last slide. If we have here the measured levels in 750 meter and on the X scale, the center frequency, this is an unmitigated pile driving event at 750 meter. This is the mitigated one. This is the background noise. So that means at several kilohertz, there is no pile driving noise at all measurable in 750 meter distance to the source. If we just have to take into account the harbor porpoise or high frequency or very high frequency marine mammals, then this is a very good approach. But if we talk about fishes or low frequency or mid frequency mammals, then we have problems because the overall noise reduction is not that big in this frequency. So I just wrap up. There are a lot of noise mitigation systems available, but they are limited in, let me say, offshore applications. We have reduced blow energy. We have new hammer techniques which will come up like pulse and MNRU, and we have alternative foundation designs. If we talk about noise abatement systems, they are ready for offshore. We have the hydrosound damper, the HC noise mitigation screen, and the bubble current system. I expect the ADBM system will come in this game as well. We could save up to 15 decibels for a single noise abatement system. If we have a combination, we come to 20 dB, maybe a little bit more. All these noise abatement system and noise mitigation measures need a project-specific adaptation or optimization. And if we talk about environmental impact assessment in the US, this is very complex because you have to take into account, you have to calculate this impact radius. So the challenging topic is to compare between the underwater noise prognosis in advance and the real world data thereafter. So just to start this discussion in this game on is how to monitor these environmental impact assessment, and with respect to impact ready. What is about other physical metrics like particle motions or particle velocity? We are just talking about sound pressure, not about this. So if we talk about fishes, we have to think about this as well. And do we underestimate or overestimate the efficiency of noise abatement system and noise mitigation systems for different marine species regarding disturbance? Just have a look on the frequency depending insertion loss. Thank you very much.
Wow. Michael, thank you. Thank you very much. I guess it's my turn to go. I have some trepidation in following that with so much great information and options for us to contemplate. All right. I will be quick. I just want to introduce you to a new project that we have, and that's just getting started up. In fact, we're still in the negotiation phase with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the DOE. So I will just run through this and try to be brief, but again, just to introduce this wildlife and offshore wind or Project WOW. We responded to a funding announcement from the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to our co-funding this work to evaluate impacts of offshore wind energy development on wildlife in U.S. Atlantic waters. And I'll get to what wildlife that includes in a moment. So what we put together is a diverse...
Would you like to just, sorry to stop you really quick,
Okay.
just share your screen? You're just in the edit mode.
Oh, I thought I hit that. Got it. Thank you. A broad multi-sector and multi-institutional collaboration to address this. So we've got folks from doing PAM measurements to biological oceanography to a variety of other expertise, including statistical and animal, and also mapping, geospatial mapping. We also, as part of this effort, have convened or are convening an external advisory board. And that external advisory board consists of as developers, as you can see, and this is a very important part of this project, is to work with multiple sectors of this arena to forward good ideas, to forward mitigation measures, as we just heard about, and also to bring research results into the primary into the arena as this industry develops off the coast of the U.S. So as you can see, we have quite a few. We also have NGOs joining, as well as state and local government representatives, so that we can get a broad representation as we move forward. Okay, so the areas of research focus that were identified by the DOE and BOEM, the first two are the ones that are relevant for today for ocean noise. And one is the construction noise on marine species, the effects, potential impacts of construction noise on marine species, and then also changes in habitat and changes in marine species use of those habitat during development. The other taxonomic groups that are involved are marine birds, birds and bats. So I'll obviously not focus on them today because that's ocean noise, not related. Okay, so just quickly go through how this is conceptualized, and we'll progress. The first part of WOW is to do data synthesis or data aggregation and construct frameworks, and I'll run through those frameworks in a moment. So we're not going to do a whole synthetic. There's a lot of data out there. A lot of data have been collection have been sponsored by the developers, by the agencies, and one of our jobs is to help aggregate those data sources and make sure they're available for various analyses, including gap analysis and construction of risk assessment frameworks. Part of that, then we will identify some areas to go in and do some primary research in our integrated regional ecosystem studies. And you can see the target species there, as Michael mentioned, that we do have baleen whales that we need to take into account, and specifically North Atlantic right whales and other large whales. So then the data from those will be fed back into those framework, the risk assessment frameworks, in attempts to decrease any potential impacts that are identified. Just quickly, that are guiding research questions, and this is drawn from the larger effort that's been going on along the east coast of the U.S. And convened largely by groups like by the state of New York and the regional wildlife science entity that has come out of that. Some of those efforts to identify some of these questions that we picked up on to define our proposal. And so, what are those? Exposure and context, a very important part of the acute behavioral responses in marine mammals during wind farm construction. And then the longer term habitat changes through a variety of other methods. And some of those include, not surprisingly, passive acoustic monitoring. One of the other components of WOW is to validate new technologies, one of which we're going to work on some advancements in acoustic localization technologies. And then we will also be attaching tags to animals during and around those construction activities, and what we really hope to develop as some in situ experiments using the actual construction measures, construction periods, to do some of this testing with close coordination with the developers for safety and for expediency. Okay, just quickly about the frameworks. This was a big part of the proposal, and I have just 3 quick examples. And moving from increased need for information, but also to increase predictive capability as we move through these different types of frameworks. Starting with the most simple, which is just occurrence, exposure, and response, into the other ones, which I'll get to. So if we just look at these are the data sources are many, as I mentioned earlier, and one of the Duke co-PIs is Pat Halpin in his Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab that put these figures together. There are again lots of data, lots of collaborators, and we hope to be a force multiplier in this space as we move along. So just quantifying exposure and the potential for response and consequences is one, the initial framework. As we move into more data, Brandon's going to talk about risk assessment frameworks and the development of a specific one. But then we move on to a matrix which has some ability to quantify the risk to the animals, and then ultimately moving to a population consequences level of risk assessment, which of course requires quite a lot more data, but certainly some species along the East Coast that are candidates for that. So that's just a quick run through Project WOW, and we are, as I said, we're hopefully nearing our completion of negotiations with DOE and BOEM, and we'll be moving on to actually conducting the research hopefully next year. So a big thanks to the collaborators, to our the developer partners that have been with us since the beginning of the development of the proposal, and we look forward to working with them in developing the research and bringing it forward. So there we go. Thanks. On to Brandon.
Thanks, Doug. I will keep us going, and I'll share my presentation, and I'm going to try to keep us on track in terms of timing. Is that coming up okay, Juliet?
Looks great.
Okay. I'm part of a group of people that have been working on this evolutions of this earlier risk framework for almost 10 years now, and fortunate to have some of the folks on Dom, Jen Amaral, and Chris Clark on as panelists, and Bill Ellison has been an important part of this. There's 2 recent BOEM reports of this that I'm going to talk about that are available online, or I can share with anybody for more detail. I'm not going to do this justice in 10 minutes, but I'll try to give you an overview of some of the thinking that's gone into this this relativistic risk framework approach that we've developed. It started, Dom and Jason Wood and I developed this risk assessment framework that we kind of contrast deliberately with the NOAA thresholds approach that existed when Pacific Gas and Electric was proposing a seismic study off of California. And one of the things that happened after we rolled that out was there were people from all different sides of the noise debate that had seen it, and from the industry side and the conservation side and the science side, including 3 people that I know that are very hard to get to agree about things, that basically said, we think you're onto something here. And some of the industry folks from Shell and BP sort of picked up on this. And we looked at seismic surveys in the Gulf of Mexico, first as these kind of discrete activities, and then with some support from NOAA and BOEM in the context of what we call aggregate exposures, where you have an activity, but it's in the context of other things happening, which of course most everything is. And most recently, we extended that assessment to offshore wind development scenarios, which is the kind of cursory results I'm going to share with you here. But throughout this process, the goals were to try and bring in parts of the earlier assessments that kind of made sense, that looked at hearing and behavior. Some of the process here would sort of dovetail with these existing paradigms and hopefully get people familiar with this and accepting of this kind of risk assessment approach to evaluating relative levels of risk. But to bring into it some other factors, biological factors, acoustic, ecological, environmental context factors, and look at other aspects of exposure too, like what is the existing risk that animals are facing from other stressors. And we wanted these frameworks to be adaptable to new contexts like offshore alternative energy. And as we're moving into some different scenarios of alternative energy that have issues like entanglement or ship strikes associated with them, to be an adaptable framework. We sort of came from a few sort of guiding principles or observations that collectively we'd recognized through research and trying to apply research and conservation. One is that disturbance doesn't occur in a vacuum, and it's not just sound that matters. There's other factors that are influential. A second is we've often looked on very, very small geographic scales, and we need to be looking on broader scales. And the third one, which is kind of bolded because it's the foundation of the overall framework, is that the spatial, temporal, spectral, and contextual aspects of sound in potential disturbance in relation to the species in question are really the parameters that drive risk. And that in order to evaluate that, we need to be using biologically significant frameworks and bringing in factors like population status and distribution and adaptability and other stressors. And then finally, we felt that we needed a kind of assessment framework that's transparent, it's understandable by people that are not statisticians, and that considers variability and uncertainty. And those are challenging things to do, but we think we've made some progress. So I'm just going to briefly highlight some assessments that we did of some scenarios off the US East Coast. Again, there's a 100-page detailed BOEM report I can share with folks that goes into this in a lot more detail. But one of the key aspects is being able to segregate the population into sort of sub-regions within an overall larger population. And there's a process we went through that was kind of novel to this, to break the US East Coast into these 7 biologically relevant geographical zones. And we're looking at one area within those that is congruent with the lease areas off the Massachusetts and Rhode Island coast, but isn't explicit to any one lease area, but took kind of the largest, at the time when we started, a kind of a large wind farm with 180 monopiles, a smaller wind farm with 60. And we looked at some different scenarios where in 1 year you install just the piles from the larger one. In the second year, there are different temporal windows of overlap or not between the larger and the smaller one. And in the third year, there's operation of each of the 3. And I'm not going to have time to go into all of them, but The overall paradigm, and Doug showed a version of this, which actually kind of updated even since I shared that slide with him to reflect the relativistic nature of this. So from lowest to highest, we come up with quantitative markers that give us numerical scores that are associated with a risk rating on two different axes. One of them, what we call the exposure index, which I'll explain, that gives us some idea of the magnitude or the overall kind of intensity of the exposure. And another axis, that's what we call species-specific vulnerability, that has a number of factors in it related to the species in question, and there's sub-components of each one of these, but they essentially consider factors related to the species and its population trends and status, how it utilizes that overall habitat, and how much compensatory ability it has, factors associated with potential masking and other stressors. And I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. I left a slide like this for all four of them in the reserve slides, and as I said, can share the talk and the report with anybody. But under each one of these, there's a series of elements that get you a quantitative score based on, in this case, factors related to the status, trend, and size of the population that are attached to certain benchmarks, like the stock assessment reports, like the IUCN distinction of small numbers, that incorporate things like uncertainty, where if you don't have a population trend analysis in the SARS, you actually get a positive score, where if the population's increasing, you can actually get a negative score. So you go through each of these for each of those four elements and come up with a total risk score through that process that we segregate into these relative risk ratings associated with the species vulnerability. That's that x-axis of that matrix. And then the y-axis, and this part, they're equations that go along with every one of these terms that I'm not going to go into in detail. But essentially, you have a quantitative, spatially and temporally explicit calculation that looks at the spatial interaction, the temporal interaction of sound and animals in time and space, that gives you an activity index, a spectral index that relates the frequency of the disturbance with the frequency of hearing of the species in question, and then a way of crossing and normalizing those to give you a relative index of exposure risk for the different scenarios and different species. And one of the things that's good about this is it can be run relatively quickly, and we can test different scenarios of time and space and assumptions. And from that, you get a relative exposure index value for the scenario and the species that are assessed. The change that we made from what Doug actually had showed is, instead of very high, we have highest, which is intended to reflect this is relative to the assessment that's being conducted, and that's really the goal here, is try to give a relative level of risk within a certain context for different kinds of operational scenarios. So just some really quick example results. If you sort of step back and you look at right whales on the left and common dolphins on the right, you'll see that, and this is specific to just the vulnerability axis, right? That right whales obviously have a higher assessed degree of vulnerability than common dolphins do, and that it's somewhat ephemeral throughout the year. So from top to bottom, the assumption here is, in that year one scenario where there's an installation of one of the larger wind farms, that it either starts at the beginning of March, the beginning of May, or the beginning of July. And you can see that as that happens, obviously the risk is higher within the 4 months that's presumed to occur, but the degree of that within the same assumptions changes throughout the year, primarily as a function of changes in the habitat use and compensatory ability of that species. Whereas for the common dolphins, the overall risk is just lower because these certain factors about population and other stressors are lower, and there's just less change throughout the year. But just kind of big picture, this gives us the ability to say, okay, clearly for right whales, having a start at the 1st of July with common assumptions gives us a relatively lower level of risk than for starting at the 1st of March, and that right whales are more vulnerable than common dolphins. Neither of which is that surprising necessarily, but being able to do this in several scenarios and look at other things like, what if we have a mitigated scenario, as Michael talked about, where you have bubble curtains and the disturbance level is 5 kilometers instead of 10 kilometers. Or in this case, where we're looking at 1 pile a day assumptions versus if we were to have 2 piles a day. And an interesting thing that comes out of this is, if you look at that, the relative exposure index and the predicted risk for 1 pile a day versus 2 piles a day for right whales in March, you get a higher degree of risk if you drive 2 piles a day in total for that scenario. But if you have that same scenario in the period of July, where you have an overall level of risk that's lower, you actually get a lower aggregate risk driving 2 piles a day and getting it over quicker than you do with 1 pile a day. And the same thing holds for humpback whales. So just gives us the ability to look at these different kinds of scenarios using common assumptions that are quantitatively based, that gives us relative levels of risk. And then the last kind of insight here, and there's kind of a lot in here, but looking at right whales on the left with the 1 March start, and on the right with the 1 July start. In the March case, you don't really see very big differences in the overall relative risk, whether you're talking about a mitigated case with 5 kilometer assumption of disturbance, or an unmitigated case with it being 10, or 1 pile a day, 2 piles a day. Whereas in the July scenario, where you have a lower overall level of risk, you get this clear distinction in the relative risk for a mitigated case versus an unmitigated case. And again, we see that lower overall risk if you drive 2 piles a day during a period of time when the animals are really not very present in the area. So last kind of point on this is we see this really key distinction between the importance of the spatial and temporal distribution of the species in evaluating risk. That's done on a monthly basis in this kind of assumption. The timing could be a real useful way to mitigate risk, the temporal timing of construction. It's kind of challenging. It was challenging for us. I didn't talk about operational scenarios, but there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the exact timing and ships and patterns of operation, at least in the information we had, that can make assessing some of that relative risk difficult. We see these effects of mitigation, but they're temporally explicit of how big of a difference they can make based on the temporal pattern of the animals. We see where we can reduce risk in concentrating installation in some, but not all scenarios. And again, we're trying to get relative risk here, and how we can test different scenarios to try to guide decisions and guide informed mitigation strategies that can relate to things like temporal mitigation, and also give managers some ways of looking at multiple scenarios with a framework like this. So that's it for mine. Again, I've got a whole bunch of reserve slides in here I'll share with people, and I'll share the reports, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving. And I think we're going to go ahead and kind of blow through our bio break, assuming that people will take it if they need it. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We're just a few minutes late getting started here. We've mostly caught up on time. And so I really want to thank all the people that have joined into this as panelists and as presenters. As Doug said, we've really seen this organization, this partnership, this collaboration that's come together from this perspective of we're better off talking and bringing in voices from different perspectives and having constructive discussions about what we can do to reduce noise and risk from certain activities. And we've got a great lineup of people from a variety of different perspectives and affiliations. I'm going to list them off really quickly, and then we'll pivot to the panel discussion around some of these key topics. So the panelists of folks that we have represented here, with appreciation to each of them, is our Heather Spence from the Department of Energy, Jill Lewandowski from BOEM, who introduced the speakers earlier, Leela Hatch from NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, Sonia Mendez from JNCC in the UK, Dom Tollett from SMRU Consulting, Louis Lederwasch from Hirma Marine Contractors in the Netherlands, Laura Orsted from Morse, Laura Morse from Orsted, Koen Broker from Shell Renewables, Jen Amaral from Marine Acoustics, Ruth Perry from Shell working with Mayflower Wind, Katie Moore from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, Howard Rosenbaum from WCS, who you heard speak, Rachel Asante Owunsu from IUCN, Michael Jasny from the Natural Resources Defense Council, Chris Clark from Cornell University and Marine Acoustics, and Michael Stalker from Ocean Conservation Research. And Doug and I are going to help moderate the panel. So I think, unless I missed anybody, I didn't miss anybody on the panel, hopefully. We'll go ahead and pivot into the panel discussion. And Doug, do you want to go ahead and kick that off? And you and I can
sure.
moderate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bren. Just very briefly, we have three areas that we want to try and cover: noise mitigation and management lessons learned, with some subpoints. Then we'll spend a good bit of time on that. Then slightly shorter, pairing noise monitoring and mitigation requirements for ongoing developments of noise management. And that's the idea of making sure we use the data that we collect while we're mitigating and monitoring to improve future efforts. Then the last one is creating action items, and we want to spend some time. Again, we want to foster action on these issues as we create networks of folks to be involved. Okay, so looping back, noise mitigation. Yep.
Sorry, I forgot one thing. In part to try and get a good handle on the multi-sectoral breakdown of the audience. I think we're going to be launching a poll to help people do that. I forgot to mention that. So I think you'll see a poll pop up as we go through this, just to try and get a handle on how well we've done in our goal of trying to reach out to a multi-sector.
Yeah, great idea. Yep. Okay, great. While that populates, you can see it going. We'll start with noise mitigation and management lessons learned. And again, thanks to Michael for joining us and reviewing what those technical mitigation measures are. But one thing we wanted to start with was what barriers exist between sectors to be able to drive the application of these solutions. And any of the panelists are welcome to join in, but just start with that as a potential first question. What do we see as barriers? What can we do to make sure those mitigation measures get applied? Anyone want to grab it?
Doug, I can kick it off maybe.
Yeah, Koen, thanks.
This is work with Shell. Yeah, one of those ones, maybe an obvious one, but it's funding. Developing these mitigation technologies is not trivial business, right? It's like to go to the technical readiness level, ultimately do the field tests. We're still talking about multi-million-dollar projects often. So and we see that, for example, with the blue piling device, then there's hiccups, there's needs for new rounds of funding, and then the availability there, causes issues. So I think that is a key one, but I think that should also be a bit of a priority really going forward. This is a noise product. We don't need this sound when we talk about pile driving like we do in the seismic industry, right? So we can work towards removing all of that sound. And to be honest, in the next decade, I anticipate that we make a lot of progress there. So I'll end there.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Koen. Anybody else? Michael.
Yeah, sure. So I think, well, first of all, the presentation from Michael was really helpful in summarizing the European data, and there is a copious amount of data to work with. We've had the benefit, of course, implicit in Michael's presentation, of having had a very active German regulator since 2011, and really setting what we would call action forcing standards. That is to say, standards that stimulated the industry to work with government to develop new technologies. To me, that is what is missing in the U.S. right now. The standards that have been put forth for noise reduction, noise attenuation, as we call them in the States, around piling, they're certainly not action forcing, and indeed they come well below what I think Michael aptly described as state of the art, using 6 decibels as a standard. I mean that's clearly not sufficient even to get state of the art application in existing projects, let alone to push ahead to stimulate research. So I would say there's certainly I think as Ken was getting at a funding component, but there's also a regulatory element that is missing here, and I think is at least a decade behind the times.
Yeah, super. Thanks.
Maybe if I can add, Doug,
Michael. Yeah.
Mike, this is Ruth from Shell,
Yes.
just kind of elaborating on the US government piece in industry. There's also a barrier of perception bias. So some of the opportunities to work between government and private industry, we have strong relationships. We've been able to form these collaborations with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management because of their mandate and their responsibility with energy. But we've struggled to do that at scale, with NOAA and National Marine Fisheries, for instance, which is providing information and regulation on mitigations as a consulting agency. So that perception bias and some of the silos that we have kind of in our US government system between the government scientists and the R&D side, and then the government regulators, not all of that's connected. And I think there's differing views on working with industry who has the knowledge, expertise, and potential funding, like Kuhn highlighted, where we could do this at scale in the regulatory sense, at least in the US. But that perception bias has always been a hindrance between industry and government, particularly the regulators.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as a shameless plug, I'll say that that's one of the things that really was behind the big source of us convening this very group of Game On. So, okay, Howard, you were up next. Howard Rosenbaum.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And I think maybe this will follow on Michael's comment as well. And I pointed to it in my slide, this incentive-based programs, and I think where there can be incentive for reduction in noise. I mean, there are some that the Port of New York, New Jersey has, the National Marine Sanctuary System has in terms of, and they're typically around emissions,
Right.
And so I think there's an opportunity here, both in terms of, at various stages in the process, particularly, and even potentially we've discussed here in New York State, at the procurement stage, when the developers go to sell the energy, and there's an opportunity there. So, just leave it out there as food for thought.
Sure.
It's been discussed, and it would be great to kind of see that a bit more, because I think that's a win-win.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks, Howard. Jill, I think your hand popped next.
Great. So yeah, I think these are all great points. I know one of the things that I had on my thoughts for barriers was that sort of really clear performance-based target, and I think that's something that we can do through dialogue. If we can identify, what we want to have the target, such as what Michael described for the EU, and set it somewhere, it becomes much easier for us to understand, how can we get there? What do we still need to get there? We can collaborate to figure that out. I think the quieting piece of this is sort of on the back burner in regulation, because we're not entirely sure what's out there. I mean, sometimes regulators aren't even aware of the latest information out there on these technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're going fast in the US. There's everything. I think everybody understands that. And so we're relying quite a bit on other types of mitigations that we have relied on in the past, detecting animals within an isopleth, shutting down, those kinds of things. So I think dialogue is the first thing, and a dialogue focused, with multi-stakeholders where we can come up with a performance target and then let the different parties, including industry, innovate to figure out how we're going to get there.
Nice. Very good one. All right, Michael Bellman, your hand popped up next, I think. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jill. So this is also a comment from me. So the dialogue is very important between industry, scientists, regulators, and so on. And let me say, lessons learned from Europe is it is always good to share results and to have a public discussion, and not to say everything is captured by NDAs or whatever. So it's good to have, let me say, yeah. A database or something like that where we have to put the information in so that everyone could learn, and we do not make the mistake as we did it in Germany. The first project make all their own lessons learned, and they have all wasted a lot of money and time to get, let me say, a small piece of knowledge. So I think this is the most barrier, to not discuss regularly with a great community.
Nice. Thank you, Michael. Laura Morse. Thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on a comment that Michael made, and his statements respectfully aren't actually correct for the latest issued authorizations for Southfork and others that are in progress. I'll take Southfork for example. Southfork Wind was recently authorized their incidental take authorization for construction. And in that, we are required to minimally achieve 10 dB, but we're also required to deploy 2 noise mitigation systems, be it ADBM, HSD, combined with a single bubble curtain or a double bubble curtain. Also, I think it's important to understand that 10 dB is not, that is a number that's used to determine what our potential exposure ranges are going to be, to estimate take, as well as to establish conservative mitigation zones. The 10 dB does not mean that we don't have confidence that we're going to achieve far greater than 10 dB reduction with what we deploy. We in fact think we do, but it's a conservative number for which the agency is comfortable with in making those determinations about exclusion zones and estimating take. It does not mean that we won't achieve greater than 10 dB. And that will be likely the requirement here forward until we get more noise measurements associated with a double bubble curtain or a HSD combined with bubble curtain. And one further thing is we don't consider the frequency effectiveness by species. So it is a conservative estimate based on what Michael showed and can better explain, given that there's going to be, we expect far greater dB reductions for certain species class. So hopefully that.
Good. Making progress. Michael Stalker.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's really great hearing all these different perspectives. And I guess in terms of barriers, I'd like to kind of intersect what Jill was talking about. Is we're moving really fast, and something that Ken has said is we're lacking funding to really kind of do the work we really need to do. And I think we need to contextualize this in the sense that we are transforming large areas of habitat that have been for millions of years adaptive habitat of the critters that are living in it. And we're going to have 50 to 100 years of opportunities to kind of harvest value out of that. And so I think we really need to look at this from a time context to make sure that we're actually spending the energy, the time to make sure that we're not basically going to exclude a lot of the habitat and the animals that are living in it from our future.
Yeah, nice, good point. And some governments are not as good as others at looking at long time horizons. I'll just leave it at that. Rachel Asante Owusu, thank you.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the invite. It's been really interesting. I'd like to say that I've been thinking about the barriers, and I think it was Michael really hit the nail on the head around sharing knowledge and also sharing what works and what doesn't work. we have to accept that if we're going to meet the 1.5 target stated around the Paris Agreement, there's going to have to be a proliferation of offshore energy generation. And that's not just about Europe, and it's not just about America. We're going to have to go further into Asia, and we're going to have to start looking at Africa as well. And I know that as IUCN, our state member in South Africa, is looking very seriously about offshore energy generation, and what will this mean for migratory species when you're not just looking at the impacts of noise or offshore generation in one of their habitats, but in a multiplicity of their habitats, depending on where they're going to be throughout the year. And I just want to do a plug for IUCN and say that we recognize this, and this is why for the first time in over 50 years, we are establishing a new commission, and that's going to be the Climate Change Commission. And I will be pestering everybody to be joining that commission and to be developing learning platforms around that commission on offshore energy, because that's a space where we will have state members, we will have NGOs, and we'll have other civil society groups as well.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Rachel. And also thanks to IUCN, there was a resolution passed at the latest Congress on ocean noise. So we appreciate that and recognize
great news.
That.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. Yeah. Chris Clark.
Thank you, Doug. And since the first topic I was going to bring, Michael Bellman has brought it again into the focal range of our discussion. But there's something that I've been increasingly concerned about, and I don't expect anybody necessarily to answer the question here, but perhaps some of you might have some insights, and that is whenever I ask the energy industry, especially the renewable energy industry, okay, so we're going to get another 30 gigawatts, or whatever the number is du jour, of renewable energy from offshore wind. When I ask, well, okay, so that means that 30 gigawatts of energy is going to be taken away from, or we're not expecting it, we're going to get rid of it from fossil fuels. And the answer seems to always come back, no. If we get more energy, thank you very much. We're just going to consume more energy. Now, maybe I'm being very simplistic, but I wonder if there's anybody here on this panel or in the audience or whatever who would make some statement about, no, there are definite determined efforts to remove fossil energy from fossil fuels in accordance with how much energy we're getting from renewables.
Right. No, it's a very good point, Chris, for sure. Jennifer Emerald, please. Thanks.
Thanks. I just wanted to reiterate, I think that I definitely agree with the knowledge being one of the barriers and sharing that knowledge between sectors. And I think we've seen from Michael Bellman's presentation, there's a lot of research that's already been done over in Germany related to all of the issues we're looking at here and now. And I think we really need to kind of rely on some of that effort that's already been put in place and utilize that as we're developing offshore wind off the East Coast here. And it sounds like the solution, we're not going to come up with it today, but it's going to be a combination of policy and engineering solutions. And it's not just the government and regulators that want to regulate sound. I think there's, a benefit for developers to reduce sound. Maybe there's an engineering solution that is quieter, that's more effective and more efficient at installing piles. So I think as we come up with those solutions, we might realize that, we don't need to put this noise into the water to install the piles. And there's actually might be a better solution. And it could be a combination of vibratory piling and noise abatement systems, but also kind of looking at how do we limit the sound at the source? And let's not even put the sound in the water in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think kind of sharing across all sectors research we're doing is really going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's one of the things we talked about for a long time was how to, through Game On, is to encourage just putting the minimal amount of energy into the water that's necessary. So while making sure that life goes ahead. Michael Stalker, is that a new hand or a legacy hand?
New hand.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I want to really punctuate what Chris Clark has said. It's really super important. We look at the projected use of energy over the next 50 years, and coal kind of tapers off a little bit, and diesel tapers off. Natural gas kind of expands a bit. We're adding more wind and solar, but the top line continues to go up. And so, we basically equated economic growth with energy use, and we really have to change that paradigm around. It's just a simple.
Yeah, super.
fact.
Yeah, thanks. Leela Hatch, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm concerned with the uncertainty that Brandon noted in his slide around the risk of operations. So just to maybe talk about, we're having a very hard time at scales that are relevant, which is both in time and in space, really considering the full operational profile of many companies across the range of a lot of species. That doesn't fit well in most of our statutory framework in the United States. And so it's an understandable challenge across a lot of different agencies, but I also seem to see it's a challenge for us to get information about where a real multiplier on the number of vessels that are servicing platforms are going to be coming and going from, what kind of activities we're going to be looking at. And when you really look at what the long lasting implications are of building a wind industry on an entire coastline, it's that operational profile and the vessel support that it represents.
Yeah.
In a really positive way, this is a huge opportunity to build quieter platforms that will have enough of since we're building them now, have the potential to be able to have a return on investment in fuel economy and some of the other energy efficiency profiles we need to see from vessels to meet new IMO standards. So there's a real window of opportunity for us to have quieter vessels.
Yeah, super. That's along the same lines of minimizing what we actually put into the water, in addition to the operational measures that we want to keep at the fore, because I think there's fertile ground there too. Sonia Mendez.
Yes, so I think one of the issues as well is that for a lot of the offshore wind industry, you can't really have demonstrator projects, perhaps like you have for other industries, where you start small and you learn and you check the impact on species. Here, for projects to be feasible and for us to meet our commitments to tackling the climate emergency and so on, we need to build big wind farms. And there is limited evidence that they don't have impact on species. And so one of the good examples, maybe from the UK, if there's some, is in Scotland. There were these regional advisory groups. And I think when I saw your presentation, Doug, where you have, I think, is it called advisory group or scientific board, where you have a lot of stakeholders. So, picking on that point of communication between stakeholders. And that's what they did in Scotland for the offshore wind farms there. And so the research and monitoring that was associated with the construction of the offshore wind farms was kind of led and directed by all the different stakeholders. Right. So they all had something to say, and some really results that were helpful for all came out of that. So it's encouraging to see you kind of following similar kind of format.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope we hit on that. And I'll just say that, in the development of that proposal and as the project comes online, it's been really heartening to interact with all those different stakeholders from different directions and really trying to figure out the best way to row all in the same direction, which is to get us to renewable energy while still maintaining their own needs and interests, but still to get everybody moving. Yeah, thanks, Sonia. We'll spend a couple more minutes on this topic and then I think we'll pivot. But I've got Heather, Dom, and then Chris. Heather Spence, please.
Thanks. I just wanted to raise an underlying challenge, which is we're talking about barriers across sectors, but we also have this challenge that anything studying noise and ocean noise in particular is inherently multidisciplinary. And so we also have all of those different voices and languages that we need to translate across. And so it's great because that's also an advantage, but also can be quite a challenge. And so I just wanted to raise that issue as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. It's very good. Yeah, Dom Tollett.
Right, yeah, thanks. Just to reiterate what people have already said about the information transfer, one of my suggestions would be to have independent paid international working groups that would focus on noise abatement systems. You could have a biostatistician group that was working with a tagging or a PAM group to design studies. So there's so much information coming in that no one person can ever handle that amount of information. But if the developers had a group that they could go to and say, what's the state of the art on this noise abatement systems, for example, and get a group working to gather that information for them, I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, fabulous. Very good point. And I will say that in familiarizing ourselves with Project WOW, with some of the things going on in the UK and Europe, that is one of the big things is the marine data assessment. I can't remember the acronym in the UK. So, but luckily you have regulators from Europe, UK, and US all on the panel. So, I'm sure they heard that clarion call. Thanks, Dom. Chris.
Yes, thank you. It's a pretty rich conversation that doesn't have time to do anything except bring it up. It's like going to a tea party or a cocktail party. I'd like to go, and I've lost the thread as to what the three main polls in the tent were that you and Brandon.
We're just finishing up number one. And then we're gonna go to number two, which Brandon.
Yeah, well, you just gave me a number. I don't know what they mean.
Oh, so, well, the first one was noise mitigation and management lessons learned.
Okay, so I would like to just go back and end with a punctuation mark with Brandon. I don't think you emphasized or got a chance to emphasize is one of the great when you have the list of the species in your in your Chinese menu, so to speak, right? You say, okay, right whales, North Atlantic right whales are the species du jour along the east coast, northeast coast of the United States. The greatest mitigation measure that we have is don't do it when the whales are there. Right? Just seasonal, take it off that you can't do this in these months. And suddenly the range of impacts are completely reduced down to single digits. Right? But that doesn't take care of the other species. So this is where this balance of a complex ecosystem, especially overlaid with a complex acoustic habitat system, there is no one solution, right? We have to realize we're going to be taking trade-offs and all this trade-offs.
Yeah.
And that optimization challenge is extremely difficult, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, thanks all for that. Very, like I said, very fertile ground, and it's great to hear those different, voices from different sectors. Brandon, you want to take it over?
Yeah, I want to make one comment on that last one, and then I'll pivot to the second one, which I think Chris hits on a key point. The temporal mitigation aspect, I think, is a really important consideration and can be really effective for species that have a high degree of temporal variability when they're time and present. That you've got a couple issues. One with what do you do with the Karen Forney and I wrote a paper called Nowhere to Go. What do you do with species with high site fidelity that have problems if they go somewhere else? And then you have different issues. And you can temporarily mitigate things like installation, but once things are in operation, you don't have that option. So there's just those trade-offs. The last point that I was going to make just about the gaps is just highlighting how as the technology changes, and as you talk about completely different and new kinds of technologies like large-scale deployment of floating wind in areas like off the West Coast, where we're looking at very different kind of scenarios out here, you got to really start to think about things differently. And as we're applying this risk framework out here, things like masking maybe aren't as important as thinking about the risk of things like entanglement, where you've got these other issues. So some of the gaps come in as you're applying these new technologies to new places. So anyway, we could probably talk about the sub bullets under that for a really long time, but I think that was really good and useful, and thanks to all the different perspectives that we had represented on that. So I'll pivot us to our second bullet point, which I think we'll maybe spend about 10 minutes talking about, and then that'll save us 10 minutes for creating action items. So the second theme that we had identified was pairing noise monitoring and mitigation requirements for ongoing developments of noise management. And sort of sub ideas about this are, how can noise be minimized during discrete phases of the development, and how can we increasingly apply in a strategic way some of the mitigation and monitoring requirements to answer strategic questions about impact that inform future assessments? How can we increase the sort of connectivity between things that people are required to do and turn those things into things that, those of us in the research community really want in a targeted way to be able to fill gaps in impact assessment, risk assessment, and regulatory decisions. So I guess maybe we'll just sort of kick it out with that idea, some of which we're trying to do in Project WOW, as you identified, Doug, where you take things that are already happening, and instead of, applying new research or, having research be a standalone thing, you try and incorporate the monitoring and mitigation that's already being done to answer these specific questions. So maybe just reactions to that, and possibilities and or challenges associated with doing that. And I see Leela's hand first.
Just maybe kick it off by saying that centralized, standardized, accessible, transparent data is the key, I think, to a lot of this conversation at the scales that we should be having this conversation. Doesn't mean that it will solve everything at all, but it's often not a sexy thing to talk about. And yet it is the most, to me, in my opinion, one of the most critical things for us to be talking about in terms of providing a repository of information that we can go back to and ask new questions and truly get at some of the adaptive management potential of the data streams that can come out of monitoring. What that means is infrastructure now, from the very beginning, that can start to bring these data streams from different assets and different kinds of requirements together into a place where we can look at questions at scales that are ecologically relevant to animals, which, as I said, are going to go well beyond any one company in both time and space.
Thank you, Leela. Lewis.
Oh, hi. Sorry, it's on mute. Yeah, thanks very much for the presentations and the very interesting discussions. Yeah, it's really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think this. Yeah, so when we're talking about noise monitoring and mitigation requirements, I think Michael mentioned it towards the end of his presentation with, looking at the complexity of dealing with, say, disturbance radii thresholds, and having, set decibel reductions rather than, say, a fixed sound level at a fixed distance. And so I work for a contractor here in marine contractors, and we perform the offshore pile driving for these offshore wind farms. And so so I'm on the vessel when we're performing this operation, and we're constantly checking ourselves with the sound level threshold. Are we near it? Should we reduce our hammer energy, or are we so far below the threshold that we can increase the hammer energy to speed up the pile driving and minimize the exposure time to the animals? And for us, that's incredibly important. If we're not able to assess ourselves in real time against the thresholds, then it's really difficult for us to make the right decisions at the right time. And if we only find out after the fact, after post-processing, whether we went over the regulations or not, then there's it results in a very high risk of us unintentionally exceeding the thresholds because we can't make the right decision at the right time. And the damaging consequence of that is it's a lose-lose situation. The developer loses, the contractor loses, the project loses, the regulator loses, but most importantly, the marine life are more likely to get harmed. So yeah, from what I've seen in the US, it doesn't seem to be heading in the way of a fixed value at a fixed distance that you can monitor in real time, like in Germany, Taiwan, Netherlands. But is it being considered in the development of the thresholds or the regulations? Maybe it's a different question, but it's for me, whenever I read the consent documents and tender documents, it really almost panics me a bit. Like, how on earth will we do this offshore and make sure, because it's absolutely not in our intention to create any harm. It's all with the best intention, but if we can't check ourselves in real time, then I really worry that we'll end up in a situation after project execution where we've all done something we didn't want to do because we didn't know at the time.
Yeah, I take your point there, Lewis. And you know, having done things like behavioral response studies in the field, and you know, been in operations in the field, you know, we've got, you can't go through a you know, a risk assessment process in real time, or do a population consequences of disturbance model in real time. Like, you need simple, straightforward, you know, rules for what you should be doing. And I would kind of maybe go back to some of what Leela said, is having, you know, some of those the standards that are increasingly in place for passive acoustic monitoring and those types of data and density data and stuff like that, probably increasingly applied to mitigation measures would be helpful.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that just to wrap up on that topic, I think what's also a bit concerning is when you see a threshold that's based on, you know, a 10 decibel reduction is required, and that's great. The challenging part about that is that's based on a certain level. That some noise modeling has been performed, and there's always difficulties with getting noise modeling done properly. And if there's an error in that noise model, then your baseline is wrong. And so maybe we do reduce the sound levels by 10 decibels, but it's from a different starting point. And so we look like we've gone over the threshold, but as a contractor, we were asked, can you reduce 10 decibels? Yes, we can. Here's a bubble curtain, maybe a noise reduction in a hammer. But then afterwards we find out, it didn't. So I think maybe it's a difficult one to discuss in a large group like this, but it's something that I really hope gets considered when these rules and regulations get developed.
Thanks, Lewis. I'll keep us moving. Michael Bellman.
Yeah. So if we talk about, let me say, the impact rating, we have to separate. We make the prediction in advance, and the prediction, depending significantly on the source itself, means the overall level, but also the spectrum. So a lot of uncertainty is on it. Then we have to talk about the transmission loss, which is there, so the propagation in noise. And then we put on top, let me say, the pile driving sequence when we talk about SEL cum, so cumulative SEL values. And we also put in this game, let me say, the frequency insertion loss of noise mitigation. So we have to be very sure that what is predicted could be understood by third party, is clearly described what are the input factors, what are the output factors. Otherwise, we will be failed if we compare apples and peaches and go offshore and make measurements and compare the real world impact ranges to the impact ranges which are predicted in advance. This is the first. And the second is just to comment, the impact ranges to monitor impact ranges from acoustic point of view is extremely challenging. So that means we need time, or anyone needs time to make the measurements, to make the post-processing, and to take this into account to recalculate the impact ranges. So just have it in mind. So time is a very challenging issue when you are offshore and make installation. And Luz said it, if we are offshore, the contractor is always pushing, be faster, we want to install each 10 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours one pile. If you're not able to compare real world data with the predicted data, how to go to the next installation and to install the next monopile or the next foundation. So this is always, let me say, a challenging issue.
Thanks, Michael. I want to make sure we don't run out of time for our action items, and I want to make sure we hear I haven't heard from Katie yet, so I'm gonna skip over a couple of folks and ask Katie to talk, and then I think if I could maybe ask the other people with their hands raised if they could drop their comments on this into the into the chat, that would maybe be helpful. I just don't want to lose the time to do our action item last point there. So Katie, can you close us out there, and I'll apologize to the other folks and ask them to do that.
Sure. My apologies as well, but thanks, Brandon. Just a couple of thoughts from my perspective from kind of the stranding, marine mammal stranding side of things. Layla, Chris, and you, Brandon, all said certain things that kind of struck a chord with me. And when we're looking at the representative species or kind of the target species that we're using when we're evaluating impact, you know, whether we're looking at North Atlantic right whales as the most vulnerable versus the common dolphins, you know, I think we have a really complex situation, as Chris alluded to, where we can't overlook those other species that are involved. And to Layla's point on the data, I think there's a huge amount of data, especially from a US perspective, because of the stranding networks that we have that are monitoring. So I think there's a huge amount of baseline data that we can also use. Even when these things are offshore, we just see changes in patterns, you know, of what we're seeing. And I think there's a resource there that could really be tapped into for monitoring impact or potential impact. And you've got great like long-term baseline data sets there that I think could be really useful. And in a lot of other places internationally too. As Rachel was saying, the need to look in other places and build up that capacity elsewhere.
Thank you for sharing that, Katie. I think with that, you know, we knew we were not going to have time to kind of go through all these things in as much detail as everybody we had, but that was very healthy and useful insights. And there's some good things in the chat I'm seeing too. Doug, let's go ahead and move into our last phase here.
Yep. Action items.
Yeah. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And just to when we conceptualized Game On, what we wanted to do was get to action. And when we introduced it, we were going to have Elvis's a lot less talk and a little more action playing when we started to introduce it. So that's the vein. And on that, not to pick on government and regulators, but under creating action items, we have what government actions and policy steps can be prioritized. What are the most promising engineering solutions, which I think we've probably heard, we've heard really good information about today. And the last one is how can multi-sectoral collaboration be truly harnessed and put to good work. So those are the three, and I would say emphasize the first and third, the government side, which we've also talked a little bit about, but also ideas about how these multi-sectoral things can really be harnessed. So anyone want to start us off? Kuhn, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Kuhn, you're muted.
Sorry there.
Yeah, you good.
Yep. Okay, sorry. I'll continue a little bit on what I was saying earlier. I think incentivizing further R&D in the technology development, I think would be a really good start. And also there, I think there's a lot of room for collaboration between the different stakeholders in that space, which are the, you know, industry representatives, the installation companies, conservation community, regulators, basically, you know, the whole community in this space. But you know, to really that first step in avoiding the noise or maybe even minimizing it, yeah, I think further technology advancement is key, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, cool. That incentive idea has come out in several ways. I think that's a good one to pursue. Yeah, Heather, please.
Well, since you called out government, I figured I would just jump in a little bit. So, I mean, at DOE, so we're trying to encourage the best technology out there possible. We're not regulating it, but we are looking at innovative funding mechanisms. So we've been going recently to trying things like prizes, where there's a lot of flexibility in how we can set up those funding opportunities. But I'll also say that I think sometimes there's a sense for folks outside of government that, I don't know, maybe things aren't transparent, or maybe we're scary, but actually you can just come chat with us. So unless we're in the middle of some particular stage of a funding opportunity where we're not allowed to talk to potential applicants. But aside from that, if you have ideas, we're trying to do things the best way we can, and so you can just reach out to us and we can have a conversation. So there's no barriers there. We can just have those conversations. You can just reach out directly.
Nice, good to know. Jennifer.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely think that incentivizing the different groups involved in installation as well as operation of the wind farms too. We've talked a lot about pile driving and minimizing sound there because it's of the most concern. But when we consider operations too, what's the increased vessel traffic to the area? That's going to increase the overall ambient noise levels in the ocean. So kind of working on, I think this was mentioned earlier, working on quieting ships. What's the incentive for developers and construction companies, whatever, to make their ships quieter? Will it help their fuel consumption? So kind of, I guess, pointing out the benefits that everybody can reap from quieting technology in operation and construction of the wind farms.
Yeah, great. I will make another shameless plug. We have plans for a future Game On workshop on ships and ship quieting. So stay tuned. Michael Jasny.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Well, I guess this is just going to build on Jennifer's point. We have been spending much of the time talking about construction noise, but operations, of course, has a much longer time horizon associated with it. I mean, we're talking, given the scale at which we need offshore wind, we're talking at looking at some kind of habitat modification taking place over very large scales over long terms of years, and it's going to be essential to understand through effective monitoring, including baseline monitoring, and not only what the impacts will be, if any, but also it'll be essential to really focus attention on trying to mitigate some of those effects. There are already some technologies and engineering solutions available to reduce noise and vibration from operating turbines. I think one thing as an action item for regulators and others is to focus attention on data acquisition, R&D, and ultimately implementation for inclusion of those solutions in operations. And I will also add, the sooner that the agency can define guidance for developers, the better, because I know some developers, they begin to purchase equipment well in advance of installation. So giving developers that as much advance notice through guidance as possible, I think would be helpful here.
Okay, great. Howard, just 1 second. I'm going to take a moment and to the almost 200 attendees that are still here, thank you. There's lots of questions in the question and answer box, and right now, which we've already asked our panelists, is to put some action items. Think of one action item you can put in that Q&A box. We're harvesting all that. We have Juliet Lee, who you've all heard from. This is her master's project, and she will be collating this and turn it into a spectacular, no doubt, product. But we'd love to have suggestions and action items in that Q&A box. So thanks for that. You still have 6 minutes to do that. Howard.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Doug, I think you hammered on that a little bit, or pulled on it a little bit. That I think there's a lot of room for this Game On team and the participants to think about the incentive-based space. And Kuhn gave one example, I gave another, Jennifer just picked up on it. Here, particularly as we get into the operational side and the increased vessel traffic, I think there's really opportunity there, and that's a really good role for Game On to think about. Gets a little bit out of the regulatory space. It gets a little bit out of thinking about how to make it, what can work, try to provide those opportunities and solutions. When we've talked to various members of industry, various forms of government, they always say, you know, if we do this, it's not, we're going to figure out how to, you know, not make that a detriment, you know, and however they're going to do that in terms of whether they pass it on to the ratepayer or however they're going to do it. And as long as the playing field is level, you know, in terms of that incentive and everyone knows going into it, I think it can be a real opportunity. And I think it would take an injection of some really good thinking from folks across this, you know, cross-sectoral, you know, platform here. And I think there's real opportunity here with the Game On team and colleagues to move that forward.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Howard. Chris Clark. And you're muted.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write in the Q&A thing as fast as I can, but I can't write that fast. So the one point I want to bring up is this, and it's written in there, but the second point is the issue of time constants of different actions, right? So we had long ago in the faraway future, we had this issue of noise in the ocean and whales are going to go deaf and all this kind of stuff, right? So then we have regulations. And the regulations, sorry anybody who's a regulator, but typically get cast in stone, right? And so we have something that says, thou shalt do the following things. And then science comes along and technology comes along and says, you know what? The time constants of bureaucracy are not matched to the time constants of technical advancements or biological knowledge. And I think what we have to make sure is when we go through this process, everybody that's involved recognizes that we have to have flexibility. We have to provide dynamic management, if you will, and not get bogged down where we have something that says this has to happen.
Right.
And so it has to happen.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Laura.
Yep, just a few comments on the topic of operational noise and how that can be addressed longer term. I think it's important to point out that for most of the majors on the energy side, they do have targets for driving down CO2 emissions in their supply chain, the so-called scope 3 emissions. And you're seeing all the companies set really aggressive targets. And so you will continue to see a decarbonization of the supply chain, which includes support vessels. And you will see an increasing electrification of the shipping industry. It's happening. But there is this tension in the market, a new market like the US, where we are being driven as energy companies by the demands of the state because we're meeting the state-based demands. And so, and working with developing local content and building, a local supply chain and increase the job availability. So there is that tension of how you do that, and you want to be competitive. Howard hinted at that. There is definitely each of the companies try to forward lean in different ways to outcompete, but ultimately it comes down to that rate that the actual ratepayers are they're driving toward. And so, what opportunity is in there to meet all those competing demands? There's definitely a lot of opportunity, and we will see electrification and decarbonization in the supply chain. It's but there's a lot of different factors in that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Tom.
Yeah, thanks. My action items are testing the reliability and efficacy of different real-time mitigation options, including observers and real-time passive acoustics. Going big on the first few wind farms, the large wind farms, in terms of a monitoring scheme. Bring in the biostatisticians, so make sure your study design's robust and is going to get you the power that you need. And then make sure in those first studies you're doing integrated studies that include prey and ideally satellite tagging, as well as passive acoustics and the sort of studies you're doing. So a couple more wow projects on top of already happening.
Exactly. Yeah, great ideas. Yeah, Michael Bellman, I think it's going to be our last word.
Thanks. Just a small appetizer. So we make a lot of underwater noise measurements during operational wind farms in Germany, and we are currently wrapping up this together and make a cross-project analysis, what is radiated by, let me say, the turbines and the foundation into the water. But this is only a tiny piece. If we talk about operational noise, we also have to take into account vessel traffic to the offshore wind farms for maintenance. We also have to take into account collision risk and so on. So for a tiny puzzle piece, we may be able to share some more details within this year.
Oh, nice. Very nice. All right, well, we've reached the end of our time. A big thanks to all of you on the panel and all of the folks that attended. We were up close to 300 attendees, which is really fantastic. And you saw the poll results, which shows just how broadly represented the interest is in this issue. So a personal thanks. Some of you I hadn't met before. It's great to have you, and most of you have worked with before, and it's really a pleasure, as I think I can probably speak for Brandon as well. And the Game On steering group. You know who you are and have been part of it all along. We look forward to, please do watch the Game On website. We do have quieting workshops 2 and 3 and exploring practical approaches again for action in noise associated with shipping, and then also seismic / geophysical exploration. So with that, we're just past 1 o'clock. So a big thanks. Brandon, anything else you wanted to
just thanks to Juliet Lee. Was really, this wouldn't have happened without her.
Yes.
You know, we've wanted to get some action and move this, you know, the ideas of having this overall workshop and addressing all these things in a face-to-face workshop kind of got speared by COVID, like a lot of things, but we're still hoping to move, you know, potentially towards that as a culmination of these workshops. But this first one wouldn't have happened without Juliet. So, and I guess just the last thing, this is not, you know, an end point. We're hoping that we've made connections with new people, that there's some, you know, things that have been shared. There's new contacts made, and you know, our goal really is just to keep discussion and dialogue and progress moving forward on this. So we hope people will connect with one another and with us for more information. I took a couple things I need to do from the chat to send people things, so we'll do.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for your efforts and energy. Thanks all.
All right.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Great.
We'll keep the Q&A. We'll keep the Q&A open for a little bit if anybody's still typing.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, I'm still typing. Don't cut me off. You can't believe it, right?
Yes, we can.